Welcome back, MTG Joe here. Today I'm going to help you find a deck to play in the Arena Open this weekend. This is a kind of pay tournament that's hosted on the Arena client. Depending how you do, you can win 1,000, 2,000, or 2,500, I think, USD dollars. The format is historic. Day one, you have the choice of either playing best of one or best of three. And normally each week I do a meta breakdown. I tell you what the best decks are on the Arena ladder. And we're going to kind of piggyback off this installment for the week. And we're going to do two separate videos. This one here is going to be for best of three historic. I'll also do one of best of one. And really we're going to look through a bunch of stats, tournaments, results, stuff like that, and kind of provide you with a bunch of deck list ideas that you might want to take to the tournament if you do want to play in it. Our primary source for most of our data does come from Untapped GG. It's a companion tool that runs alongside your Arena client, tracks your win rates, collections, a whole bunch of useful data. If you do want to get started with that, the link is in the video description down below. I will link all these deck lists, either importable deck lists or the links directly to it from there. For historic best of three, for a big enough population size, I'm also looking at MTG Melee, which is an online tournament provider. It's where pretty much all the big tournaments get played, as well as just a couple decks. I think one deck from MTG ArenaZone, which is another way that gets curated user deck lists. Of folks, and I kind of tried to do a spectrum of viable decks, I think, for the best of three format. So jumping in, going to start off, I'm looking March 17th to now, which is April 13th, so about a month range, Platinum to Mythic, 35,000 matches, so it's matches, not games. A match can consist of 3 games, so upwards of 100,000. The top performing deck in this span is Azorius Auras. So this is really Jim Davis's list from the Mythic Championship. You're using the combination of Kor Spiritdancer, Sram, as well as Esper Sentinel to kind of get your card advantage. This version's also playing Stormchaser Drake. So Jim made the conscious decision to play Stormchaser Drake over Light Pause. And he mentioned because he wanted to have more proactive and allow you to play up like your counter spells, stuff like that. So you don't get the tutorable elements that Light Pause does, but this is another evasive threat already built in that can hold a bunch of auras and kind of smash into your opponent. This version is also main decking Spell Pierce in particular. In the sideboard, you do get options to stuff like Cerulean Drake for the Phoenix matchup, some counter spells, Hushbringer for ETB style decks, some removals, as well as Graveyard Hate. Moving next, we see Azorius Affinity. So one cool thing with Untapped, like I mentioned, it tracks and syncs your collection. So I'm missing 6 of these cards. I need 6 wild cards to build it. I have 9 in my collection, so it gives you ideas what you have and don't have. Really helpful when you're kind of planning out deck building. So we've seen a couple variations of these artifact affinity style decks. We've seen Mono Blue, we've seen Azorius as well, but they're kind of built on the core of like Nettle Cyst, becoming a very large creature. You have Thought Monitor to give you card draw. Moonsnare prototypes a new card in it to kind of give you ramp, as well as pseudo removal. This particular version is Azorius, giving you access to Portable Hole, Esper Sentinel, which is a really powerful effect into like the Phoenix decks, which we'll see next, as well as Ingenious Smith to give you pseudo card advantage. Main boardable Graveyard Hate in terms of Soul Guide Lantern and Tormod's Crypt. You got Shadow Sphere for Trample Lifelink. Karn makes really big creatures, and you got some counter spells. In the sideboard, you have access to like Sai to make wide boards. You have the Flagship as removal, some counter spells, some grind value in like Bankbuster, some more removal, Pithing Needle to hate on certain cards, and another Shadow Sphere for like the aggro matchups. You'll also then jump into Izzet Phoenix, which is typically one of the most played tournament decks. On the ladder, it tends to have a lower win percentage because it's not the easiest deck to navigate, and it's one of the decks that probably has the biggest disparity between like your average player and someone who's got a lot of reps in it. I know even like I've played Phoenix at times, like when it first came out in like the Ravnica block. I played that a lot in it when it was a standard deck. I played a bit of it in historic as well, but I'm not the most versed. And I have like a 50-ish, 55% win rate with it. It's inherently powerful and consistent though. So it does allow you to kind of have edge cases where you play poorly and still win. But you're basically just playing a bunch of busted cards. You can see the curve. DRC on 1 filters a lot of your draws. You have a bunch of 1 mana cheap draw and discard style effects. 1 mana pretty much kill anything potentially. This version now is moving away from the all-in graveyard focus with copies of like Crackling Drake main, Stormwing Entity. You still have the Ox. Brazen Warrior can hit like hate pieces or like break up 9 lives, stuff like that. Finale gets back Arc like in with 1 card, so kind of playing into that respect. Your sideboard just gives you a bunch of different options, some counter spells, some disruption, some removal, graveyard hate. Sylvia, when they're bringing in a lot of graveyard hate, this is 1 creature that just attacks and gets card advantage on its own, and notably it doesn't die to things like a Braid or 3 damage removal. You also have Chandra and then Big Chandra as some more grind. So if you just kind of transform into an Izzet mid-rangey style deck, it's a way to kind of attack it like that. Lastly, we don't have win percentage because the volume of games isn't there. I personally don't like this deck, but I know a lot of people do like Niv Mizzet, and there's so many ways to build this deck, but the core of the deck is kind of Niv Mizzet, fetching up multicolor spells. You have a variety of 2-color removal in the form of like Verse, Drown in the Lock, Lightning Helix, Territorial Kavu's a 2 mana 5/5 most of the time in this deck. Expressive Iteration, very busted card draw spell. Then you have some sweepers, some general hate cards. This version's playing Calling Ritual as well. You got Nerf Teferi. Your sideboard, just a mix of cards as well. Hitazuku's a very good card in like the Phoenix matchups, as well as like this Affinity matchup. If you look at how many 1 and 0s they have, it can kind of blow them out. We've actually seen some of the Phoenix decks as well more recently go Grixis and then have copies of Hitazuko on the side. So it's something to be mindful of. They just play the Grixis off the pathways. Something just to keep in mind. So we have that. I'm actually going to see, is the Grixis version here? Sorry, I just want to see if I could pull up a deck list of the Grixis version. Nah, it's not there. I've seen that from time to time, that it kind of pops up here and there. So yeah, with Niv, you kind of get a whole bunch of smattering of removal, counter spells, hate cards like that. Generally just don't like this deck because I lose more to the mana than anything. You have a very powerful top end with Niv, but like Niv gets hit by Dispute post board that you'll see in a lot of these decks. Your mana is very particular in terms of like lots of tap lands. Without like Omnath or stuff like, or Bring to Light, I just don't like this deck as much, but it's here if you're interested in this type of archetype. A deck that does very well at tournaments and is probably one of the best decks in the format, but just not very popular on the arena ladder, at least in terms of the metrics we see, is Golgari Food. It's basically green-black food, Witch's Oven. It's a very meticulous deck to play, so folks don't really like this as much, I find. This was from Nerd Rage Gaming. It was $1,000 tournament. This was the winning list. They went 9-1 with the list. So you got your Cauldron Familiars, Gilded Goose, Ravenous Squirrels to kind of get big. Can I do visual view? Let's do visual view. That's nicer. We also see the addition of stuff like Painful Bond in this deck, as well as Deadly Dispute for like huge card advantage. Trail of Crumbs draws you a bunch of cards. 4 Meat Hook, kind of drain and gain. And it's just really nickeling and diming your opponent. You got some Soul Guides, Bone Shards in the list as well. Lurrus is a companion. Argles for some card draw post board, some Calling Rituals. This is an interesting card. It hits so much of your own deck. I'm very surprised to see this be included in the sideboard. Graph Reaver for like Planeswalkers, Outland Liberator. You got Thoughtseize post board. I guess this just breaks the mirror, but I don't know. I don't play this deck much, so that's an interesting inclusion that you see in the sideboard there. So I'll link this list if you're interested. We have Rakdos Arcanist. So there's a couple versions of the Arcanist deck going around. There's ones with Reflections of Kiki-Jiki, so kind of blinking your creatures. Some are on the traditional Arcanist, Dreadhorde Arcanist shell. Others are just like a Rakdos mid-range shell that's kind of mixed in. But this one here, you're looking to use Dreadhorde Arcanist to buy back a bunch of cheap spells. You have access to like Magmatic Channeler for filtering, a bunch of hand hate in the terms of Inquisition and Thoughtseize. You have Seasoned Pyromancer to refill your hand. Arcanist could flash back all these discard spells. A couple Karoxa, Unholy Heat is removal, Fatal Push is removal. Graveyard Trespasser eats away at your opponent's library, or graveyard, gains you some life, as well as some Rahilda to get you some card advantage with this version's playing 3 Chandras. It's not unusual, you'll see a split of Chandras and 4-mana Sorns. Sorin provides you a lifelink token that's evasive against the food decks to also get you in some damage. This deck tends to deal a lot of damage to itself with like Thoughtseizes and stuff like that, so the life gain can be relevant. Post-board, we just see another copy of Chandra, we see the Hitazukus in the sideboard to eat up those smaller kind of graveyard decks. Most of the graveyard hate is 1 mana in like Soul Guide Lantern, stuff like that. Just more discard where relevant, some more removal where relevant mixed in there as well. We have Selesnya Enchantments if you like to be a prison deck. What's the screenshot view? This is so much better. Sorry about that. I don't use this like that often for deck lists, like in the visual view. But this is a 9 lives deck. So 9 lives and Solemnity basically locks your opponent out from being able to deal damage to you. Notably, the way to get around this is with Stomp or Questing Beast. So Bonecrusher Giant's Stomp ability or Questing Beast both get around damage prevention. Otherwise, it leverages Sithis Harvest Hand as well as Enchantress's Presence to draw you cards every time you hit an enchantment. Jukai reduces the cost of your enchantments. Sanctum Weaver generates you a bunch of mana. And typically the way you win is by generating a bunch of mana. You can activate Destiny Spinner's ability, which animates your lands. You also have like Lair of the Hydra as a creature land that can work, or like Paladin class. Most of the time your opponent just can't beat this if they're a creature-based deck. You also have Sterling Grove that lets you tutor up specific enchantments as well as protect your board. Interestingly, this version is going for Paladin's class versus the counterspell-based decks. We see Weaver of Harmony to double your ETB style effects of your enchantments or activated or triggered abilities. Cleansing Nova, I guess, in the mirror, you take out your 9 lives and you just break parity with this. Some Divine Purge for removal. Gideon's Intervention would name typically like Stomp or stuff like that. History of Benalia, so you kind of just become like a mid-range E-shell if you're not going to be on the combo plan. Typically against like Control, this is not really relevant. Especially because now they play Farewell or stuff like that. So you bring in the histories and just kind of beat them down that way. We have Azorius Yorion. This is basically, we didn't have enough space in a normal 60-card deck to play Yorion, so let's throw 20 more cards in there. Notably, the big card you're seeing in a lot of these decks now is the Wandering Emperor. That's weird. Come on. Bigger. No. No, you're going the wrong way. Sorry, I don't know what the UI on this site. So you have the Wandering Emperor mixed in here with Teferis and Narsets, counter spells and like Archmage Charm, 4 of Shark Typhoon. So notably, this isn't the Lotus field combo with like Strict Proctor. You're just a lot of removal here. You have sweepers like Wrath of God, Day of Judgment, 3 of Farewell, just hitting from like every angle there. So you're winning this with either like Cycled or Hardcast Shark, Wandering Emperor could run away at games, or Hall of the Storm Giant. In the sideboard, you have like Nezahal in the counter-based matchups, some copies of Baneslayer and Lyra for the more aggressive matchups. Hermit comes in the control matchups, and then you just have counter spells and Graveyard Hate mixed in. And then lastly, if you want to make a meta call, this is a list that about 2/3 through the way of March was 158 on the ladder. This is a green-white humans company. So if you're anticipating a lot of like Control, Phoenix, stuff like that, you could play more of a taxing style deck. So copies of like Esper Sentinel, Thalia on the main board. You have card advantage in the form of like Ranger, Captain of Eos to find specific threats. Thalia's Lieutenant pumps up this team. Inquisition Captain, access copies. 5 and 6 of Collected Company, and then you have like Adeline's very powerful, Spellbinder could attack the hand, then you have utility creatures with like Hopeful Initiate, Selfless Savior, as well as Giant Killer. Sideboard, you have a mix of your anti-sack, some creature removal, card advantage, sweeper protection, graveyard hate, and then just like removal, and then some more graveyard hate. And then with your mana base, you're able to play some utility lands, as well as the Lair of the Hydra and a Cave of the Frost Dragon. So kind of not like we've seen mono white humans before. The green just gives you some card advantage and better sideboard cards, like even Dromoka's Command as a fight spell. So that'll wrap it up for best 3. If you do want to see best of 1, I'll have another video up and you can check out both. And if you need these deck lists, they'll be linked in the video description. As always, appreciate it if you can, drop a like, comment, and if you haven't done so already, consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching, hope you have a great one, and stay safe out there.